Okay, everyone. So this is a presentation around, I guess, living well during COVID-19. So a bit of psychological advice for those living with mitochondrial disease and their families. Hopefully this will be helpful. It does have some kind of specific recommendations, but some general recommendations as well. And I plan on speaking for about 30 minutes, but if you need to log off or leave, that's absolutely fine. Like I said, this is now being recorded and will be uploaded to the Lilly website. So I guess just an introduction. So thank you very much for joining. And my assumption would be that you've joined because you're either living with a mitochondrial condition, you support someone living with this condition, or have a personal interest or experience of mitochondrial disease. I guess regardless of kind of where you've joined, welcome. I hope this is helpful. Like I said, it's planned to last around 30 minutes and there'll be 15 minutes at the end just to answer some questions I received earlier in the week. I might not be able to answer all of the questions, but I hope I captured most of kind of the broad themes and what people found helpful. And again, unfortunately, I can't provide individual advice over this platform, so please accept my apologies in advance. I'm sure my email address will be circulated if people do have particular questions. Obviously, you could speak to Liz and the team at Lilly if you do have any questions at all. Okay. And as I've said, these slides will be available on the Lilly website, so please don't feel you have to write things down or remember them. So the kind of beginning with talking about the dreaded COVID-19 pandemic, it really is a difficult and unprecedented time. I think that's what kind of news outlets keep referring to. And it was announced as an international pandemic on the 11th of March 2020. The UK response to this was a national lockdown on the 20th of March and guidance for those considered vulnerable to adopt shielding measures for at least 12 weeks. Without a doubt, communities throughout the world experience this news with great anxiety, fear, worry and uncertainty, and we simply hadn't known of anything like this in our lifetime. Whilst the government's social guidance was relatively clear, there was some uncertainty about the exact length of time that this lockdown will be required, or what this might mean for people living with a long-term health condition like mitochondrial disease. Understandably, our community was worried about the social and psychological consequences of these measures, whilst also recognising just how important these measures were to keep people physically well and safe against COVID-19. So thinking a little bit then about some immediate psychological reactions, I think for those living with mito and also for those caring for people with mito, the news of the lockdown and shielding was, putting it mildly, a great shock, as it was for us all in the community. And many people may have experienced a wave of emotions, including, and I've just listed some emotions there, things like anger, confusion, sadness, worry, stress, irritation, fear, and just some dots and a question mark because probably all of us experience something slightly differently. And when I say all of us, kind of I include myself in that as part of the mito community of thinking, well, how do we begin to help people and people who feel worried by this? And that's why the truth is that the world was also experiencing these emotions. We simply could not have predicted such a scenario. Our communities, and that includes the professional scientists, charities, everyone felt these emotions, but we felt them directly in the communities as well that we're part of. So, will we all feel the same at the same time? And the answer is really simple, no. We will not feel the same at the same time. And to demonstrate this, I thought I'd show you, it's often referred to as an emotions wheel, so it just gives you a sense of the different types of emotions that people experience. So hopefully you might not be able to see the detail, but you can see there that there's quite a large spectrum of emotions that fall into different categories and different descriptions of them or different ways we would describe them. And again, it might not be one word that you particularly resonate with. It might be all of them at different times. I guess it might change. And I really like this kind of illustration. ACT Anti is someone who creates illustrations for a psychological therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy. And I think the theme is really that we all experience difficult emotions sometimes, and it really is okay to feel whatever you feel. And that's particularly true at the moment during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I guess I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. So thinking a little bit about the mito community and living with a long-term health condition, I think the mito community already have experience and skills to use during this crisis. So managing uncertainty, just in itself living with a long-term health condition, but particularly mitochondrial disease, where there's so much difference between different conditions. Managing feelings of isolation, so potentially being at home more or being away from communities for whatever reason due to health or fatigue or other factors. Overcoming physical barriers or restriction, so having to navigate kind of life and the world with kind of challenges that you may overcome day to day. But also working together. I think I probably should have said at the beginning that I'm fairly new to the mitochondrial community, but I've already been struck just by how much the whole community does work together, and that was before the pandemic. So I hope that those skills can be used as well as we kind of navigate the next kind of few months and beyond. And part of that then is also fostering a large and supportive online community. I'm not really part of that community yet. Maybe this is my first step, but I get the sense that actually the mitochondrial community is massive online and in growing as well, which is a really, really positive thing. So why is everyone's psychological reaction different? And some of that is to do with circumstance. So mitochondrial disease is different for every person, a bit like a thumbprint. But also we're all unique, and that is because we're also human beings. I think part of what makes us human is the fact that we all have our idiosyncrasies and what makes us us. There may be common features, but you may still live with or care for someone whose experience is different. For this reason, and again I'm going to keep repeating this, it's a bit of a mantra, that there's really no right or wrong way to be feeling at the minute. And actually, for some people, there's been a feeling of relief with the social distancing measures, and it has meant that there's been less pressure to engage in challenging activities or social encounters that might bring on difficult psychological reactions prior to the pandemic. And because of that, I think people have maybe kind of been met with feelings of guilt, so feeling guilty for kind of enjoying the social isolation. That's something I've heard as a bit of a theme recently. But many people also experience a rush in the new responsibilities they have, which has made it hard for them to recognise what they might be feeling. And these feelings may come much later after the pandemic is finished. So as the kind of the dust settles from all of this, that people are noticing more challenging emotions during that time. But one of the most kind of common emotions in our community right now is anxiety and stress. And anxiety is a really common emotion when we experience psychological or physical threat. And this response has evolved over time to help us avoid dangers or threats and to keep us safe. So anxiety is a perfectly normal thing. And again, it's a normal emotion and it has a physical response to threat. And this threat can often be based on your own experience and sometimes past experiences as well. We may also be experiencing more stress because of our concerns for those we care for, or because our caring responsibilities, both emotionally and physically, have increased recently. There may also be kind of a reduction in the amount of direct support you can access. So being able to attend community groups or attend support groups or kind of other support that you might usually access, even if that's kind of going out in the local community for a cup of coffee with friends. And I think I'll talk a little bit more about anxiety and stress and about how to manage anxiety and stress later on. I guess another emotion that people have been talking about is a sense of loss, or a bit of a sort of grief. I thought I'd talk about that a little bit more. The restrictions experienced by people as a result of COVID-19 can be a loss for people living with mito and their families. And that's a loss of familiarity and routine, a loss of contact, physical contact, a loss of hobbies, events, or experiences that we were looking forward to. The Lily Ball being an example of one that I can think about that I know people were really looking forward to. Changes to appointments or treatment for a health condition. And ultimately, this sense of loss might be experienced like grief, a grief for what was or what might have been. And this can have an impact on our mood, leading to feelings of sadness. You may also notice that you feel more tearful, or someone you care for feels more tearful than usual. And again, these feelings are likely to be very normal and natural reactions to the current circumstances. Okay. So I thought I'd just kind of think a little bit about how we manage anxiety in particular. And one of the challenges of anxiety is it kind of gives us really unhelpful, painful thoughts, I guess intended to keep us safe, but it usually doesn't feel like that. And actually, some of the questions I had leading up to this webinar were specifically about some of the challenging, upsetting thoughts that people have had about, say, care and treatment, and about, you know, what would happen if they were to go into hospital at the moment with a mitochondrial condition. Would they receive treatment? And the reason I'm bracketing that in an anxious thought is because it's a real worry, and it's something that sticks around, and people find it hard to move on from. And that's something I'll talk about a little bit at the end as well. So one of the things I thought we could do as an activity during this webinar is what I call the white bear experiment. This is a kind of cognitive experiment. And worrying thoughts, troublesome, and can maintain our experience of stress, our fight or flight experience. Sometimes they are there when we don't want them to be there, and they may feel intrusive, and they may get in the way of you trying to feel relaxed at home. So this is the white bear experiment. And what I would like you to do now, in your virtual world, is just imagine a white bear. I want you to imagine it in your mind, get a sense of how big it is, what it's doing, if it's walking, the landscape it's in, just those kinds of things. Hopefully, I won't be able to ask everyone, but hopefully everyone's got a nice white bear implanted in their mind. So what I'd like you to do now is I'd like you to stop thinking about the white bear. Do everything you can to stop thinking about that white bear. I'll give you a couple of seconds. Okay. Now, you've probably noticed that it's very difficult to get rid of the white bear. In fact, I'm going to say it's almost impossible to get rid of it. And that's because I've implanted that white bear in your mind. And this is a bit like a worrying thought. And what we do with worrying thoughts is the more we try to fight with them, the more we say, I wish I wasn't worrying about this. I shouldn't be having these thoughts. I just want these thoughts to go away, the longer they stick around. So probably for the duration of this webinar, you'll think about the white bear. In fact, it's going to annoy you probably for the whole webinar. So I'm sorry about that in advance. The likelihood is, though, that as your day goes along and you move away from thinking about the white bear, slowly, it'll disappear until you see that John Lewis advert at Christmas with a white bear in it, and then suddenly you'll remember that psychologist on a webinar talking about a white bear. But the point is, fighting with our thoughts isn't always a good thing. So I wanted to give some tips about kind of how we manage anxious thoughts. Okay, so dealing with our white bears. The more we fight, the more they hang around. So how do we deal with them? So one recommendation is to pick an absorbing distractor. And that's just a really fancy way of saying throw yourself into something that you really, really enjoy, or that your family enjoy if you're supporting somebody. So whether that's painting, drawing, Xbox, PlayStation, television, a movie, a bath, whatever that might be, pick something that for a moment, kind of just, you can really, really enjoy yourself with it and distract from some of these painful thoughts. If you can, and this is really difficult, try to postpone thinking about it. So think, okay, I won't necessarily, I need to tell myself that I can't necessarily worry about that right now. I need to focus on what I'm doing, and I plan on dealing with this worry or this particular concern I have tomorrow, for example. Create a to-do list. So take that worry out of your mind, stick it on some paper and think, okay, that's my kind of to-do list of things I need to do. And then you can kind of face that when you feel in a position that you're able to. So for example, if you're someone who experiences a lot of fatigue, or someone you care for experiences fatigue, maybe worry isn't the best thing to do when you're really, really tired. Think, okay, I'm going to focus on addressing that maybe when I've had a good night's sleep. And meditation and mindfulness, some people find this really, really helpful for dealing with anxious or uncertain thoughts. I think it's important to say that some people actually find that they can't concentrate on those activities because they feel so worried. So that's an option, but people do find it really, really difficult. Okay. So what about managing uncertainty? So I always say that uncertainty and anxiety are best friends. The more uncertain we feel, generally the more anxious we feel. And that also includes nervous excitement. So if you've ever been on a roller coaster, you kind of have that, because it's so uncertain, you have that kind of nervous anxiety as well. And you may be noticing that you and the people close to you need more reassurance than usual, that everything is going to be okay. Again, this is very normal because everything feels so uncertain at the moment. And trying to deal with this uncertainty is a bit of a theme of this webinar. It's about how we try to live well during this uncertain time. And the first step is acknowledging that this feeling is shared and is entirely normal given the circumstances. Again, I feel like a bit of a broken record with that statement, but I think it's really, really important just to acknowledge that this is normal. And I think I've kind of already said this as well, but the Mito community have experience and skills in managing great uncertainty every day. In fact, maybe this community has something to teach other people who aren't living with a long-term health condition about how to manage uncertainty and uncertainty challenges. So one of the other ways of kind of dealing with anxiety and uncertainty is something that Anxiety UK suggested with the Apple technique. You might have seen me, I've posted this online through various forums, but the general idea is initially just to acknowledge, so notice and acknowledge feelings of uncertainty as it comes to mind. So being able to sit there and say, right now I'm feeling really uncertain and scared, and just recognizing that that's happening for you. The next part of the apple is pause, so don't react as you normally do. In fact, don't react at all, just pause and breathe. The next P is pull back, so tell yourself that this is just worry talking, and this apparent need for certainty is not helpful and not necessary. It is only a thought or feeling, and don't believe everything you think. Thoughts are not statements or facts. It's just a thought. And again, maybe as we're going through this presentation, I'm going to keep doing it, but you maybe have started to forget about that white bear a little bit as I've been talking, and you'll notice now that it's popped back. So again, just illustrating that point that as we distract away from thoughts that pop in our mind, they do come back with reminders, but distraction does help over time. So that's A, P, P. L is let go. So let go of the thought or feeling. It will pass. You don't have to respond to them. And you might imagine them floating away on a bubble or cloud, just drifting away slowly. And finally, explore. So explore the present moment, because right now, in this moment, all is well. So notice your breathing and the sensations of your breathing. Notice the ground beneath you or the feeling of your body on a chair, sofa or bed, if you're sitting or resting. And look around you and notice what you see, what you hear, what you can touch, what you can smell right now. Then shift your focus of attention to something else, on what you need to do, and what you were doing before you noticed the worry, or do something else, mindfully with your full attention. So again, I think just acknowledging that right now, all of you have given this time to hear me speak, and I really appreciate that. And I'm very kind of mindful of doing a good job, I guess, and being present with you all. Okay, so living well. So during these times, it's very important that we try to live as well as we can under the current circumstances. And what do I mean by wellness? And this is something we're going to cover in the next group of slides. They focus on your physical and psychological well-being and the link between the two. And this feels particularly important, I guess, for people living with Mito, because there's a huge link between our mind and our body, and how our body feels and how our mind feels, and likewise how our mind feels and how our body feels. So one of the things I just briefly talked to you about is a psychologist called Maslow, who created a hierarchy of needs. And you might have seen this before, but Maslow was saying that in this kind of hierarchical pyramid, that it's about what we need day to day and in our lives generally. And at the basic level of that is physiological needs. So that's food, water, warmth, rest. And once we've got that, we can then begin to think about our safety needs. So security, safety, having a safe home, for example. Again, once we've got physiological needs and safety needs covered, we then maybe need belongingness and love needs. That's intimate relationships, friendships. And above that then is esteem needs, so a sense of prestige and feeling of accomplishment. And right at the top, and I think this is something to aim for all of us, this is the idea of achieving one's full potential, including creative activities, and that's referred to as self-actualization. And the reason I've shown this is because right now, during the COVID-19 pandemic, for me, this is where we're currently focusing from a hierarchy of needs perspective. We're focusing on getting physiological needs met, but also safety needs. So making sure you've got access to food, water, warmth, and rest, but also security and safety. So that's feeling safe at home, feeling safe in our communities, making sure we've got access to medication, to good nutrition, good hydration, good sleep. Sleep is very, very important. But right now, during COVID-19, I think we should all give ourselves permission to say, actually, if we can just achieve those two things, we're doing pretty well, because everything else feels really uncertain and difficult. Above that then, from an esteem need and belongingness kind of need, I think here that's where we need to use creativity and also acknowledging what you are achieving during these difficult times. I think if you look after somebody with mito, or if you're looking after yourself and living with this condition, I think just looking at every day about how you're kind of surviving and managing during this lockdown, which is incredibly difficult. And I think giving yourself a bit of a pat on the back and saying, yeah, I'm doing as well as I can actually, even if at times it feels really, really tough. And hopefully then that'll give you that sense of that kind of feeling of accomplishment. I'd like to think so, but I know that can be really difficult too. And the creativity part then comes from belongingness. So about friendships and intimate relationships, we're having to be more creative with how we use technology. Certainly I'd prefer to do this face-to-face, but we're managing with the webinar, and hopefully that's helpful. And all of that fosters this sense of belongingness, kind of friendships and connection. So again, you know, physiological needs and safety needs, they're a real focus and priority. And if we can move on to that sense of belongingness and esteem, using creativity and giving ourselves a pat on the back, then that's a really good thing. Okay. So this is some kind of practical advice about coping at home. So for people who are living with a mitochondrial condition, it's really important that you kind of avoid watching, reading, or listening to news that causes you to feel anxious or distressed. Seek information updates at specific times during the day, once or twice. And the sudden and near constant stream of news reports about an outbreak can cause anyone to feel worried. And I include myself in that, so making sure that I only check the news on a morning instead of an evening, because I'm finding the news is affecting my sleep at the moment. So get the facts. So gather information at regular intervals from the World Health Organization website and local health authorities platforms. And I've got some links later on about kind of trusted sources of information. It's really important that you find opportunities to amplify the voices, positive stories and positive images of local people who have experienced the new coronavirus and have recovered who are supporting a loved one. Again, we tend to hear about all of the negative things that are happening, but it's really good as well to hear about personal strengths or achievements or things that people are working hard to get through this pandemic. It's really important that you stay connected and maintain your social networks. So even in situations of isolation, try as much as possible to keep your personal daily routines. Routine's really, really important for our mental health, and it also helps regulate things like energy levels and sleep and other important things. And it's really hard to do this, but during times of stress, it's also important that you pay attention to your own needs and feelings. And there's a danger that we can feel quite selfish in some of the things we do, particularly if we're caring for somebody else or we have other caring responsibilities. But as I always say, you know, in order to look after those people, you really have to look after yourself as well. Engage in healthy activities that you enjoy and find relaxing. This doesn't have to be a marathon. This could be you know, activities like cooking, baking, watching a movie, sitting outside if you can, if in the garden or having the window open, exercising regularly, keeping regular sleep routines and eating healthy food. And that fits with that Maslow idea I was talking about the basics. But also keep things in perspective. It's easy to see kind of the whole world as being scary, dangerous, terrifying at the moment. But and I guess it actually is at times, but I think this will pass. This isn't anything we would want, but also you're a community of people. The Mito community are a community of people who fight every day and do an amazing job with that and fight for other people as well. So it's important to say, you know, we can do this together. So advice then for those caring for or living with someone with a Mito condition. So feeling stressed is an experience that you and many other families or carers are likely going through. In fact, it's quite normal to be feeling this way in the current situation. Again, that's my broken record there. Stress and the feelings associated with it are by no means a reflection that you cannot care for, do your job, or that you are weak. Again, these are perfectly normal emotions. It's important that you take care of your basic needs and employ helpful coping strategies, so regular breaks and drinks, fluids, food, anything that helps you keep well. It's important that you keep each other members of the family's feelings in mind by sharing how you think and feel about the situation. So opening up about, I guess that feeling safe enough to be vulnerable with a partner or a friend or a family member and saying, I'm really struggling with this at the moment, or I feel really worried about this, I feel really scared about this. But also being open to hearing other family members or parts of the family talk about that. It's important that you take the perspective of your partner or family member with empathy. They may feel differently to you. And again, there's kind of no wrong or right here. There's just a whole experience of different emotions during this pandemic. And if relevant, take turns managing the home, kids and other responsibilities or other caring responsibilities where possible. Because it might be that you need to rely on each other or rely on each other in the family as much as possible at the moment. I've seen loads of really creative ideas online about getting fun things prepared which you enjoy doing together as a family or couple. I've seen things like virtual date nights. I've seen actual date nights at home where people try to do the best Gordon Ramsay meal. But I think it's really important that that you get kind of fun things enjoyed that you can do together as a family or a couple. And I really like this statement, and I think if you're caring for someone or if you're a family member, if you could take one sentence away from this whole presentation, it would be this, and that it's about connection, not perfection, and you can turn towards each other as a team. Okay, so I've just got someone else coming in. Okay. So staying connected then, there's lots of good websites out there to keep up to date and stay connected with our communities. So there's the Newcastle Wellcome Trust Mito update pages. So I contribute to that page as well. Obviously the Lily Foundation, so they've got some useful contacts on their website. Reputable sources of news. I think it's harder and harder to find reputable sources of news now, but certainly the World Health Organization is a really good one. And where possible, try to stay connected with our communities, whether that's online, social media, sending a letter, whatever that might be, but just staying connected with people who are part of our communities is really, really important during these times. And I hope something like this webinar is part of that. It's about connecting our communities where possible. So what about talking to somebody about COVID-19? So some people living with a mitochondrial condition might have changes to their thinking skills or their cognitive abilities, and this is just some practical advice about how to talk to those people about COVID-19. So where possible, use simple language and avoid jargon, and use less abstract language. So refer to there being an illness rather than coronavirus, because coronavirus is quite an abstract, difficult concept. Use visual images to explain complicated points. Break it into smaller themes and cover each one in turn. So what is coronavirus? Why we are staying at home? What we need to do, etc. You may have to repeat information a number of times or go over points, and encourage the person to ask questions if they have them, and give the person time as well. Write down a summary of what you've talked about so the person can read it in their own time, and be available to answer questions if needed. So this is some advice for parents who might be talking to children about COVID-19 and children living with a mitochondrial condition. First of all, listen and acknowledge. So children and young people may respond to stress in different ways, and often that can be in changes in behaviour. So maybe being more distracted, being less engaged, quieter, that kind of thing. Provide clear information about the situation. So talk honestly and openly about the situation and give honest answers. If the young person has cognitive difficulties, keep it factual and honest and avoid abstract language or jargon. Be aware of your own emotional reactions. So children and young people often take their emotional cues from important adults in their lives. So if we're feeling exceptionally worried, it may be that children take that cue as well. And again, you shouldn't have to apologize for how you feel, but just being mindful that maybe you're going through that worry, and you may be able to say to a child, you know what, I feel really worried at the moment. I'm going to take some time out for me, and can we speak in 15 minutes once I've had a cup of tea, or I've had time just to, kind of distract myself. Connect regularly. So connect with family using new electronic platforms, particularly if there is a greater distance between key people. And I spoke to somebody this week about it's hard. Technology's hard as well, and access to technology. But you can also do things like writing letters. Certainly, if you want to paint someone a rainbow and send them that to display in their window, that kind of idea. And I know the Lily Foundation have got loads of resources as well online for I guess, connecting our communities and keeping people connected as well. And particularly for children, create a new routine. So routine gives children and young people an increased feeling of safety. So whilst we are adjusting to these strange times, it's kind of making a new COVID-19 routine to get us through this. And finally, a bit like, I guess, for ourselves, limit exposure to the media and talk more about what they have seen and heard. The media can be a scary thing to see because it's usually very bad news, negative news. But if children have seen the news or heard the news, it's important that you talk to them about what they have seen and what they have heard. Okay, so here's some helpful resources for young people. Again, I'll send these slides around so that people can access and click these links. But there's books for children. There's kind of different links that talk through how we should talk to children about coronavirus. There's platforms where young people can log online and speak to someone if they're feeling anxious or nervous. But also an easy read guide. So if people who we care for have cognitive difficulties, there is a version of talking about coronavirus in a kind of an easy read version to talk about feelings in the body. And I guess one of the final things, I know this is being covered elsewhere online, but it's really good. And I think it's probably one of the best resources we've got at the moment is a psychologist called Dr. Russ Harris has created this thing called Face COVID, which is a way of remembering what we need to do during this pandemic. And it's a lot of what the themes I've talked about. So focusing on what's in your control, acknowledging your thoughts and feelings, coming back into your body and engaging what you're doing. So it's about being present in the moment with those feelings and focusing on what is in your control rather than what's out of your control. And the face part is the first part of really then kind of coming back into the present. So our mind can take us all the way into the future about what might happen, about how long lockdown might be, about the economy, about all that kind of stuff. But it's really helpful then to, again, focus on what's in your control, acknowledge how you're feeling, come back into your body. So notice the sights, smells, sounds around you, and then stay committed to what you're doing in that moment. So whether that's, caring for someone, looking after yourself, making a cup of tea, whatever that may be. And I guess then when we're more present, we can then, the COVID part is things like committed action. So saying, okay, I'm really going to, work hard this week on doing some exercise or doing some exercise that have been given to me. So opening up to our feelings, to thinking about what matters most to us in our heart. So that's the values part. So what's really, really important to me. Identify resources, so sources of strength and support. Who do I need help from? And the last one, disinfect and distance, which is about the general principles of managing life during COVID-19, which is about, regular hand washing and keep, social distancing. That's the best way of beating this virus. So I've kind of rushed through that a little bit, but what I will do is I will send kind of some details about Face COVID for you to read, and it's also available on the Welcome site, and I'll make sure it's available on the Lily site as well. Okay. I thought it was helpful to think a little bit about life beyond COVID-19, because there will be a life beyond COVID-19. And we've heard a lot in the media over the past year about this idea of being kind to ourselves and to other people. And I think there's something about this pandemic that it's the biggest reminder ever that we need to look after ourselves, and that our psychological well-being is as important as our physical well-being. And at times it can feel more important than our physical well-being. And I think acknowledging as our community, but also other communities, that we all have our stuff going on, and that it's important that we look after each other as we emerge from this COVID-19 and what we've learned from it. But also, I guess, it might be that for families, say, who are caring at the moment, who are caring for someone with a mitochondrial condition, it might be that you need more support after the COVID-19 pandemic is over, as well as support right now. But particularly, I think once those support structures come back in and you've then got time to think about your well-being and that kind of sense of having a debrief from the whole thing. So I think generally living well and staying well is about connecting with what matters and staying involved. And it can be easy to look at social media and hear of the efforts people are making to fight back against coronavirus. If this is something you can do, then great. Anything that supports our community is a really, really good thing. However, for many people, just getting by is a real priority at the moment. And it's okay if you don't feel able to do those things. It's okay if it feels hard, impossible, or difficult. Reach out to your community and draw upon the skills you have in living with a long-term health condition. You maybe have a lot to teach other people as well. So ultimately, living well is about staying connected with things that are important to you, possibly in new and creative ways. And sometimes the worrying thoughts we have make it really hard. It dampens that creativity. Think about what can we do? And I think if we use some of our energy and efforts to think, okay, how are we going to do this thing that was really important to us before COVID-19 in a new and creative way, hopefully that'll be really, really helpful for people. It's good to feel like you can do something during a time where it feels like it's hard to do anything. And obviously this will never replace the real thing, but if it can help us feel a sense of familiarity, that will make us feel like we're living as well as we can under the current circumstances, and that's a really, really good thing. So that's kind of the end of my presentation. I'm going to answer some questions now, so I'm going to try and just exit this and go back to myself. Okay, I think hopefully everyone can see me now. Hope so anyway. So I'd purposely kind of muted everybody just to make sure that the line was kind of clear, and I thought now I'd just kind of cover some of the questions that I'd had during the week. I think a lot of the questions generally centered on a theme of specific worries and anxieties that people had, that it's actually really difficult for me to answer some of them. Some of them were specifically about questions about health and questions about what would happen if I went into hospital or someone I care for went into hospital. And I think those questions are worries, and that's understandable. And what I'd say is, if you can, is contact the people who know the answers to those questions as much as possible, because ultimately finding out the answer is the best way of hopefully feeling a little bit better. But don't be surprised though if those questions keep coming back up repeatedly. So even if you get an answer, it might be that anxiety is a problem, and it's just this constant sense of feeling anxious. And I guess then go back to some of the things I talked about earlier on, which is about staying connected, about acknowledging those feelings, about kind of distraction. I'm very curious with the people who I can actually see their faces, if anyone had forgotten about the white bear in the last kind of 15 minutes of what I was talking about. And if now that I've mentioned it again, it's back. And that's very typical then of kind of these, what I call intrusive anxious thoughts, that the more we try to battle them, the more they'll stick around. And every now and then they'll pop back without us wanting them. I guess before you came onto this call today, there was no way you were thinking I was going to end up talking about white bears. But here we are, and now it's in your mind. And this is kind of how anxiety works a little bit. So there's a general theme, I guess, with these anxious thoughts about looking after yourselves. Because we're all different and we're all human beings and we're all living potentially with mitochondrial disease or caring for someone with mitochondrial disease that's different, everyone's different. We need to figure out our own ways of how we look after ourselves and how we look after other people. And again, it's about connection, not perfection. It's about making sure we stay connected with what matters to us and what matters to other people, rather than this sense of it has to be perfect, no matter what social media tells us. Because if you've done something, I guarantee someone's done it twice over, has painted a picture and has had it published online somewhere, because that's just social media. So focusing on the basics and getting what's right for you is really, really, really important. So yeah, I think that covers kind of the broad theme of the questions I had. The questions, like I said, were predominantly questions about specific worries, and I would direct you to just kind of getting local advice and recommendations, whether that's from doctors or from hospitals or the people who you're connected with in those communities. I know there's a danger that I unmute everyone and then we get this feedback. I know there's a chat function if people can access that, if anybody had any other questions or anything they wanted to ask. I'll wait for it to ping if there is. Okay. I can't see any at the moment. I suppose that kind of concludes what I planned on talking about then. I hope it's been helpful in some way. I can appreciate it was probably quite broad and non-specific, but I think during these times it's important that you focus on kind of what's right for you, and it's very difficult for me to give specific advice for individuals. I think there'll be my kind of contact details will be emailed around if people would like to ask me any other questions. But I think I really just wanted to say thank you, everybody, for kind of logging on and listening to me. This is a new experience for me. It wouldn't necessarily be the way I would typically do it, but I hope once this is all over, we can hopefully meet in person or do this a little bit differently. But yeah, no, I think I just log off now and that's the end of it. But thank you all very, very much, and take care of yourselves and look after yourselves. So thank you, everyone.